I've been reading a lot of studies that a lot of men now are not having sex at all. And there's actually going to be a decline in population as time goes on, as this progresses. I mean, it could get worse. I mean, there's sex robots coming. I mean, it's
Yeah. And then AI porn.
yeah,
It's like, and on the one hand, it's like, how could a real woman, even an attractive real woman, compete with every kind of woman with all sorts of augmentation? And
yeah,
then with the VR world, it's like a guy can maybe, I want this kind of experience to experience. And, uh, you might have heard me mention this in one of my episodes, like the goat sheep's, not the goat sheep, yeah, the goat sheep study,
yeah,
where like basically they tried to mate sheep and goats. They tried to cross mate, which they wouldn't normally do naturally, and they raised them a certain way. They got them to do that, but then they put the goats and sheep in the study back with their original species, and the
yeah,
female goats and female sheep immediately went back to mating with their species because that makes more sense. But the males, because male mammals brains lose plasticity after puberty, whatever your sexual imprint is during puberty for a male mammal kind of gets stuck, which is why male humans or men, when you think about this with pornography, like I know personally, and I've spoken to a lot of guys who they had so many experiences, or like they only had experiences with women on a screen for throughout all of puberty, and they just are not, they just can't get turned on by a real woman who likes them, who's right in front of them, because they even have an emotional attachment to pornography, which is
yeah,
really sick and twisted. But we are animals, and we're no different than the goats and the sheep and anything, and the
yeah.
male brain works this way.
This is like, not only is this painful and destructive to men, but it's also painful and destructive to women. I'm a 35-year-old woman who's single, and that's what everything you just said scares me. I'm like, are there going to be any men left? But I mean, but then I look up to, I see you and your wife, you guys have a beautiful relationship. So it gives me hope that not all men are taken over by this. Like there's some men out there who are not. But that's also why I appreciate the work that you do, because it helps men in that situation to bring these things up as well. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Pranzata Podcast. This is your host, Andrea Pranzatelli. This is episode number 114 on the Pranzata Podcast on YouTube. I have another guest today. This is Ruwan Meepagala. Ruwan is a coach, and he is also a podcaster, and he has a podcast called the Ruwando Podcast. I'm really excited to have this conversation with him today, as just to explain to the listeners how I got him as a guest. The algorithm had sent me his podcast, and I immediately subscribed. I loved the content he had to talk about, and I have a lot of questions for him today about stuff he talks about on his podcast. Before we get into it, if you are new to this channel and you like what you hear today, please don't forget to hit subscribe. It is my mission to grow this channel this year, and your support would be incredibly helpful. Okay, so my first question for you, first of all, thank you so much for making the time to do this. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So some of the themes that you explore on your podcast are actually pretty parallel with some of the themes I'm talking about as well on my podcast recently. And I think that's why the algorithm had sent your podcast to me. Recently, I've been exploring topics such as management of sexual energy. I know your wife, I actually found your wife's stuff as well. She also explores this as well. The effects of porn on society. I know you've been exploring that as well. Carl Jung, another thing I've been really interested in. So I have questions about this because I'm relatively new to these topics, and I feel like you're a little more seasoned. My first question for you, you had just recently done a video on your podcast about NoFap, which, to explain to the listeners, I'm assuming everybody knows by now what that means, but in case, maybe older generations, NoFap is actively choosing to abstain from masturbation. In your opinion, is there a benefit from abstaining from masturbation, in a sense that if you withhold that sexual energy, what does that sexual energy become? Do you think it's more of a negative thing to withhold that sexual energy, or is there a positive benefit that comes from this?
Yeah, well, first, I think, a lot of NoFap and the advice around it, and reason why it became popular in the last, I don't know, 15 years, let's say, is because of streamable internet porn. It's like, I'm 35, so millennial. When I discovered my penis, let's say. It took a long time to download clips. And I think that's a huge thing that maybe slightly older people or critics of NoFap don't really understand, right? It's not about not exploring sexual pleasure or,
Okay.
it's certainly not about like taking, let's say, an archaic stance of abstaining from any kind of pleasure like that. That's certainly not it. It's mainly that, especially for, let's say, Gen Z guys growing up with streamable porn, it can really, I mean, it's a lot of research that I'm not going to rattle off, but like it can
Yeah.
really affect your brain in kind of permanent ways for young males. And also it's extremely addictive, right? I mean, what is more addictive than images of women when you're a 12-year-old boy, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of guys my age and younger specifically have seen like, just as bad as many kinds of substance abuse, it can really ruin a person's life. Maybe not ruin their entire life in extreme case, but certainly affect his relations with women. And I was speaking to a friend who's a woman about this recently. Like, if you meet a guy who is older and seems like a decent guy and he's single, I'd say there's a good chance he's addicted to porn. Like,
Gotcha.
yeah, and this is just anecdotal observation and a bit of speculation. But anyway, sorry to answer your actual question. I think not wasting your arousal is a really beneficial thing. I mean, a lot of nofap kind of in a kind of a suit. It often references like ancient Taoist or yogic practices of not spilling your seed as a man, so to speak. And I think
Yeah.
there are a lot of benefits to it because any guy can attest that when you're horny and you're not wasting it away, there's a certain kind of like acuteness of attention and arousal and aliveness that you feel. Like
Yeah.
if I have sex with my wife and I choose not to come, I'm paying better attention to her the next day than if I do come, right? Like
Right.
it's just like it is a physiological thing. So without over spiritualizing or like trying to exaggerate the benefits, yeah, I think in general it's a very useful thing for men specifically to not necessarily go straight for gratification. Obviously, it makes you a better lover. I think it makes you a more attentive partner, even
Yeah.
outside of the bedroom, and it's just good for you. That's not to
Yeah.
say that, masturbation is evil or ejaculating is the worst thing in the world. It's not, obviously.
Yeah, no, I agree a lot with what you said. When you said in the beginning how it maybe some of the older generations may not understand it because they didn't have smartphones. They didn't have the access to this pornography in their pocket since they were. I mean,
Mhm.
nowadays Gen Zs are getting smartphones when they're sometimes 8, 7 years old. So you get that
Mhm.
access much earlier. And I agree with you in the sense that it takes a lot. I mean, I'm not a man, so I can't completely say I understand, but I would imagine it takes a lot as a young man to be able to learn how to manage that sexual energy. And when you're just exposed to this easy access to all these different naked women, I mean, literally hundreds, thousands of naked women at such a young age, it's like, how could you ever learn how to manage that energy? And I've also, you were saying in the beginning about studies that you said you don't want to bore me with, but we might be talking about the same studies. I've been reading a lot of studies that a lot of men now are not having sex at all. And there's actually going to be a decline in population as time goes
Mhm.
on as this progresses. I mean, it could get worse. I mean, there's sex robots coming. I mean, it's
Yeah. And then
and
AI porn.
yeah,
It's like, and on the one hand, it's like, how could a real woman, even an attractive real woman, compete with every kind of woman with all sorts of augmentation? And
yeah,
then with the VR world, it's like a guy can maybe, I want this kind of experience to experience. And, uh, you might have heard me mention this in one of my episodes, like the goat sheep's, not the goat sheep, yeah, the goat sheep study,
yeah,
where like basically they tried to mate sheep and goats. They tried to cross mate, which they wouldn't normally do naturally, and they raised them a certain way. They got them to do that, but then they put the goats and sheep in the study back with their original species, and the
yeah,
female goats and female sheep immediately went back to mating with their species because that makes more sense. But the males, because male mammals' brains lose plastic or lose plasticity after puberty, whatever you're imprinted during, like whatever your sexual imprint is during puberty for a male mammal, kind of gets stuck, which is why male humans or men men are more likely to have non-trauma related fetishes. Like
Yeah.
they might have seen something with like clothespins and the neighbor's boobs when they're 12, and like
Yeah.
now they have a thing for clothespins. It
Yeah.
turns them on. Like,
Interesting.
and you
Wow.
don't see this with women. Women remain plastic or remain more fluid throughout
Yeah.
their lives. I think there's even, I think I saw a Vice documentary about there's some villages, I think it was Guatemala, where the young men, I guess, since due to lack of access to females, they start their first sexual experiences are with sheep.
Wow.
And then you see these boys grow into men and they're actually not into women, they're into sheep.
They're like fetish. Yeah. Cause it's almost like whatever their first sexual experience is has a profound like imprint on who they become.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I mean, when you think about this with pornography, like I know personally, and I've spoken to a lot of guys who they had so many experiences, or like they only had experiences with women on a screen for throughout all of puberty, and they just are not, they just can't get turned on by a real woman who likes them, who's right in front of them, because they even have an emotional attachment to pornography, which is
Yeah.
really sick and twisted. But we are animals, and we're no different than the goats and the sheep and anything, and the
Yeah.
male brain works this way.
This is like, not only is this painful and destructive to men, but it's also painful and destructive to women. I'm a 35-year-old woman who's single, and that's what everything you just said scares me. I'm like, are there going to be any men left? But I mean, but then I look up to, I see you and your wife, you guys have a beautiful relationship. So it gives me hope that not all men are taken over by this. Like there's some men out there who are not. But that's also why I appreciate the work that you do because it helps men in that situation to bring these things up as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and it's hard. And I think, I mean, not to go into conspiracy theory
yeah,
land, but like a lot of these forces, I don't think there's like some evil plot other than maybe you can say that Pornhub is obviously trying to profit off of male tendencies or whatever,
yeah,
but it is kind of like this general thing that our culture has moved into of like it's kind of anti-nature. Like consumer products kind of replace a lot of things that we needed from each other, which
yeah,
forced men and women to be a certain way that was likable and useful to the opposite sex in hetero relationships. And there's so many things that are making it easier. So you think of like the typical young man who's maybe not so great with women when he's young. Why would he switch to the real thing if he's getting all of this fulfillment from Pornhub?
yeah. No, exactly. It's like why, if you're feeling satisfied with that, but then I would imagine at a certain point, do these, I mean, I can't speak because I'm not in a young man like this shoes, but I would imagine at some point there would be a lack of emotional connection. But you're saying that they even get some sort of emotional fulfillment from this as
I
well.
mean, of course, just like a substance addict, a porn addict is not really fulfilled. Like he's not happy about
Yeah.
being a porn addict, but it's an addicting thing. It's like it becomes so hard to connect with real women, and you're getting that real all of those feel good, that dopamine rush from your favorite porn site. You know,
Yeah.
it's just a huge hurdle to climb, and it's satisfying an itch. Whereas like maybe a lonely guy in the 1700s eventually be like, okay, I'm gonna figure out how to be likable,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and now you don't really have to do that.
Yeah. Wow. That's very destructive. Okay, my next question for you. So, um, I know I saw a podcast with you and your wife. You were speaking together, and in the podcast, you guys both mentioned that you took an active phase of celibacy where you were both choosing to not have sex with each other while you were married, but you were saying that before you guys dated or whatever, you both had like an active, choice of celibacy. I right now am in an active celibacy phase, because I had some destructive relationship patterns and I'm kind of taking a step back to get to know myself and figure out why. Speaking of porn, I also used to watch porn and I decided to give up porn during this active celibacy phase of my life. Now, I have a question that it's like almost playing devil's advocate a little bit, and I'm not sure what the correct answer is, but I know you like Carl Jung, you're influenced by him. Carl Jung states that you should never suppress your shadow, you should integrate it. Is porn technically an integration of the shadow or the shadow of lust, or is there a healthier way to integrate the shadow of lust in your life?
Um, yeah, okay, so there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
Going backwards, I would say that it is not really an integration
Okay.
because you're doing a fake version of it that is separate from your life. Like I would say an integration would be something more like, I guess for the typical guy, let's say, like I'm thinking of Dan Bilzerian. Like
Okay.
he's a guy who's integrated his lust, let's say, right? He's
Okay.
very open about sleeping with 7 women a day or whatever, right? Which
Yeah.
is typical adolescent male fantasy, right?
Yeah.
So whatever the thing is, I would say like actually do it in real life. I mean,
Right.
I got a lot of personal growth, let's say. I mean, a lot of I developed myself a lot, like exploring BDSM for a period
Yeah.
in my life, and I think that was healthy. But watching that kind of thing on a screen of other people doing it, I don't think is integrating it.
Okay. I gotcha. So I was confused about that because I was like, wait a second, I'm staying away from pornography, but technically, is that just integrating lust in a healthy way? And what you're saying is no, because it's not really the real thing, is pretty much what you're
Yeah, I
saying.
would say whatever you're into or we're into in porn, maybe do that
In
in real
real
life
life with
in
a
a safe
real person.
consenting. Yeah, with a real
Gotcha.
person. Yeah.
Okay. That
Yeah,
clear. Yeah. Yeah, that
yeah, or
clarifies that.
even imagination. Like Jung spoke, obviously, it was before screens, right? He
Yeah.
spoke a lot about active imagination, and this is something I speak about with my clients. Like if there's some sexual fantasy that is you can't get away from, like it's just always you're into it for whatever reason, you don't even know the reason for it. I think that's worth exploring. And then for a lot of men, at least, I mainly work with men. Usually when some sexual idea is like really fixating, it's because there's shame about thinking about it. Like whether, I've coached guys who have like I mean, not even crazy taboo, but like, actually a really common thing is, there's a name for it, but like the gay taboo, like if the fear of being gay makes you think of men all the time when you're aroused. And these guys might not even be gay, but they have
Yeah.
like this shame from whatever reason, and they can't stop thinking about men or penises when that's the
Yeah.
last thing they're trying to think about. Like things like that. Like if you can like really go into it without shame, I think something releases, and either you enjoy that thing or you just lose interest in it because it's not the elephant you're trying not to think about.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that's good. That's funny. That experience you talk about, like, I'm pretty sure it's like a type of OCD. Is that a type of OCD where
Yeah.
someone, I've actually had experiences of that myself in my past where like I was terrified when those types of things would happen to me. Um, okay, like if I saw a person on the street and I'm like, I don't want to hurt this person. And then like a repetitive thought comes up, like, what if I punch him in the face? What if I punch him in the face? And like I started having those thoughts
Yeah.
and I thought I was like evil. And I learned that apparently there's like a type of OCD where actually it's usually the opposite. It's usually people who never want to hurt people, like always have they might have like repetitive thoughts like that. So that's a tough one. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's often like it's maybe something conditioned into like this is the worst thing to ever think about, right? I don't know what your
Yeah.
background is. Like I assume at some point in your childhood, like violence was seen as like a
Yeah.
enforced as a bad thing. Like
Yeah.
I've been in men's groups where guys who are like the most pacifistic, sweet, like maybe even too nice of a guy,
Yeah.
and they can't stop thinking about like raping a woman on the subway, and like and they're like,
Yeah.
oh my god, why am I thinking that? And they can't stop thinking it, and this becomes this thing. And these are the last guys who would ever consciously do something. I mean, there's maybe an argument that if you suppress something enough that comes out in some way,
Yeah.
but it's usually, yeah, like you're saying, it's the opposite
Yeah. No,
type of
I've
person.
had experience with that, so I'm well aware. Okay, my next question for you. You also I saw you did a video about the Madonna whore complex. This is something that I learned about relatively recently before I saw your video. Um, First of all, I'm curious if you can explain it in a little more detail to the listeners if they've never heard of the Madonna whore complex. For me as a woman, when I learned about this, I felt pretty devastated because I was like, what do you mean? Like, I have to either be somebody's mistress or be a wife that doesn't get laid? Like, can I have both? So, if you can explain to the listeners what that is, and is there a solution to work through that issue if you have this complex?
Yeah. So in short, the idea is that typically a man will
Mhm.
categorize the women he wants to sleep with as a separate category, a mutually exclusive category with the woman he loves. And
Yeah.
usually there's mommy issues involved. Like obviously no one wants to think of their mother sexually. So
Yeah.
like, anyone they feel love with, they imprint mom on, and then they want to
Right.
keep sex separately. And then the
Mhm.
women they want to sleep with, they can't feel love for, which is of
Yeah.
course a sad state if you're in a relationship. Like, which
Yeah.
one is it going to be, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I do think, a longer version of this, I do think there is some evolutionary reason for this. Like if you think of like pre-civilization, or like if you think of early humans when we were more like other animals, like there is a benefit genetically for
Yeah.
a young male that maybe can't provide for a family to just spread his seed as much as possible without
Yeah.
attachment. And then maybe in a later phase of life, when he has resources, when he has more emotional maturity or the ability to provide for family, he focuses on one where he really invests his emotional energy in caring for, making sure the kids grow up right, as opposed to
Yeah.
just, spray and pray, let's say. So I think there's something to that. But obviously, for a grown man who does want real intimacy, it's kind of a sad thing if you're
Yeah.
looking at the woman you're with either as your mom or as a blow up doll, to
Yeah.
put it in extreme senses. So I think there's a lot. It depends on person to person. There's a lot in this to unpack, but I think that episode I think you're referring to is specifically on the mother complex. So it's
Yeah.
specifically about guys essentially with mommy issues. And one of the recommendations I think I gave that in that episode was um, to really go into your sexual desires, actually like to kind of integrate your shadows, because
Mhm.
one of the reasons why a grown man might make this split is that he feels that anything his mother disapproved of, because like love with a woman is like stuck with his mom, or like his mom is
Yeah.
taking up real estate in his like romance center where where she shouldn't really be. It's a different kind of love, obviously. So sex has to be this completely separate thing where mom doesn't go. Whereas to
Right.
actually think, allow yourself to go there together, which is not that different than thinking about taboos or integrating like darker desires of like, can you go there
Mhm.
without worrying? And actually, I don't know if I mentioned it. We might have actually cut it from that episode, but I had a client who was a much older guy. He had this
Mhm.
kind of issue. He had like sexual hangups. And for reasons completely unrelated to this, I just told him, like, I suggested to him, let yourself really imagine what you're into, what really turns you on in a way that doesn't, and like, try to manage the shame. Like, don't like stop thinking about it because you feel shame. And what he reported back to me is that every time he would imagine whatever his sexual fantasy is, he couldn't help imagining his mom in the room. Like his mom just seemed to be present. And I told them, okay, this is going to seem weird, but like,
Just go
can
into
you,
it. Yeah.
yeah, can you imagine whatever your sexual fantasy is and imagine your mom in the room and not care? Or be like, look, mom, this is what I'm doing, right? I'm a grown man, and I think these kinds of things, as Jung inspired, are very helpful, because at some point you have to be like, okay, I'm just going to get over it, right? And then mom stops taking up real estate in your love center.
In that, I'm curious, in that experiment, did this person eventually get past that um fantasy? Like, did the fantasy ever go away as a result of just going into it?
Yeah, I mean, at some point, it just was, because like the whole idea of like he couldn't help not thinking of his mom, like somehow his mom and sexual shame were connected. Maybe we didn't
Yeah.
even go into his past. Like maybe his mother shamed
Mhm.
him for touching himself when he was a kid or something, or
Yeah.
shamed him from looking at a girl. Who knows? But if he can like purposely imagine it with the kind of the attitude of like, look, this is what I'm doing, it kind of takes away that obviously imaginary social pressure.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because I had a friend who had recommended something similar to me because I had been having like sexual fantasies about something I was disturbed by, and my friend was like, "Why don't you just lean into it?" And I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah." She's like, "Lean into it. That's the only way it's gonna go away." And I'm like, "Are you serious?" Like, that was the exact advice she gave me, and it was pretty, interesting,
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of the whole like what you resist persists is very true with
Yeah,
sexual fantasies, and also there are a lot of things that we might fantasize about that maybe wasn't even imprinted in our lifetime.
yeah,
Like there are just this is kind of the idea of archetypes, right? There's certain
yeah,
emotional patterns that just get passed on, just the same way our genes get passed on. So like a lot of women have rape fantasies, even women who've
right,
never been assaulted, and they don't
right,
understand why. And it's like why would I think this? It's making me a bad
yeah,
feminist, whatever your ideology is. But there's at least, hypotheses that the reason why so many women have this fantasy is that it was a strategy to pass on our genes for thousands of generations, even though it seems really unpleasant. But like, if your tribe was conquered by Genghis Khan,
Yeah.
him and his high status barbarians were impregnating you, and this was a thing that happened so much throughout history. Anyway,
Yeah.
that could be one of the roots of those fantasies.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so that's good to know that that's a way to deal with that is just to kind of like allow and like you said integrate it in some sort of way. That's why I've been so fascinated with Carl Jung lately because he talks about integrating these things and right now I'm reading my first book by him. It's called Psychology of the Unconscious. I don't know if you've gotten into that one. I'm not even halfway through it yet. I still have a while to go, but I know he discusses like he writes a lot about um how sexuality is at the root of a lot of psychological issues and that I believe that sometimes sex isn't even about sex sometimes like sometimes it's about something else like something completely different at the root of your psychology.
Yeah, I think a lot of times that's the case. Like, I don't know if it
Yeah.
was the same episode where I was talking about the mother stuff. It probably was like where,
Yeah.
if you have like oh yeah, because I was speaking about Pornhub and how
Yeah.
they released their stats and like there's a huge rise in interest in MILFs, especially in young men. And I would equate that with the mother complex. And then it doesn't mean that guys want to sleep with their moms, but likely it's like they want to grow up out of their mother's shadow and their unconscious is using sexuality as a method, right? Like you think about, I mean, yeah, anyway, that's my hypothesis that guys who are into MILF stuff are really trying to grow up psychologically and they want to stop seeming like a boy around women. And so they
Yeah.
fantasize about the mother because if you sleep with a woman, like she's validating that you're a grown man.
What would you say for somebody who has like cuck? I hate the word cuck, but whatever. For someone who's having cuck fantasies, what would that psychologically mean? Have you ever tried to figure that one out?
So an acquaintance from a long time ago reached out to me about that. And I honestly, I don't know. He ended up
Okay.
working with a therapist, and his therapist told him to lean into it. So every once in a while, he'll send me and our other friends pictures of his girlfriend in ways like, we're not into this guy, but if this is part of your healing, I don't know. I actually kind of would love to speak to his therapist and see if this is actually like a proven way to deal with it. Not even that it's a wrong thing if everyone's into it, right? If him and his
Yeah.
partner are both into the cuckold thing, go for it, right? Right? No one's getting hurt. But it doesn't really make sense to me as like why would it does seem more like a pathology at least now. Like I haven't come up with a reasoning as to why this might be like pointing to a certain specific kind of healing or need or have an
Yeah.
evolutionary root. I don't really get it. It doesn't totally make sense other than if you're a beta male in a tribe, for the group's purposes, maybe it's better for the alpha to impregnate your partner and you raise it as opposed to your weak sperm. But it doesn't make sense as like, because it doesn't seem to
Maybe
land. I'm
it's a
not
way
really
of
sure,
like
honestly.
it might be also a way of like coping, and I'm just speculating. I don't really know, but it could be a way of coping with like fears of abandonment or fears of being cheated on. Like, so rather than being so overwhelmed by like fear of abandonment, maybe it's a psychological way of like diving into it, like saying, "Hey, I'm so afraid of this that maybe if I fantasize about it, that I'll somehow like get over it or something." You know?
I
I
think
don't
it's
know.
possible. I think it's
Yeah.
possible. It just like, I mean, because like most sexual things, I feel like it's not that hard to connect it to like what's the evolutionary purpose or why would anyone think this even if it's weird, but this one it doesn't make sense because you're going against your genes, right? Like
Yeah.
you're letting someone else and then you're raising it. It's like the worst thing genetically for a male. um so actually I want to share this. I mean, I'm not sharing his identity, so I'm
Yeah.
sure it's fine, but like this guy told me, so he's actually married. The day he got married, he walked, or the day afterwards, I think his wedding was still going on. He walked in on his wife cheating on him. And she turned to him and like she was like getting off on him catching them
Right.
cheating. And he just so happened to have this cuckold fantasy also. So it's like they were both kind of playing into somehow it lined up that he married a woman who loves to cheat and like rub it in his face and he happens to have a cuckold fantasy and like
Wow.
that's really interesting because you
Yeah.
hear about like anxious attachment theory, like we tend to attract the person that fits in with our exact issues or traumas or
Yeah.
insecurities. Like this is so specific that I was like, wow, this is I mean, it's great you found each other. You know what I mean?
It's like, hey, as long as that's what they both want,
Yeah.
whatever. Is very interesting. Okay, my next question for you. I saw you said somewhere too that you believe that every man should learn how to fight. Do you care to elaborate on why do you think that? And if so, if somebody hears this and they're like they want to learn how to fight, where could they begin?
Yeah, because I mean, yeah, going back to evolution and our genetics, like males pass on their genes after
Mhm.
competing with other males, right? Like there's many things like Bateman's principle, only the top anyway, sperm is cheap, eggs are expensive, right? So only the top males pass on their genes, they pass on them the most, and there's other principles related to that in biology. Anyway, this is maybe some, backing of like there's nothing more directly rewarding to a man to learn how to than learning how to compete with another man and win. And all sports, men obviously are more into sports in general. All sports are sublimations of fighting. Like any team sport is like basically a pitched battle with rules where you don't get hurt. Every individual sport, even tennis, is kind of like sword fighting. Like you show up with your
Yeah.
weapon and you're going head to head. And then we know for like the androgen system, like testosterone and dopamine, which are very tied together, testosterone spikes when you win a competition. Like this has been shown in
Mhm.
different studies. I think at the FIFA World Cup, it was like one of the first times that it was discovered that the winning team has double the testosterone after the game. So this is just something that like it's so primal to our nature. It's like the first maybe pro-social masculine behavior is fighting for your tribe, or in a darker way, conquering another tribe and taking their resources for your tribe. Like this is about as direct as it gets to hitting the male fulfillment circuits, which is why when guys learn to fight, they usually have greater self-control, greater confidence, greater self-esteem. They feel better physiologically because they're getting in shape. All of these things. Maybe that was a very long-winded way of saying that it's good for guys because that's how we evolved. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, now is like kind of a golden age of martial arts. Like with the popularity of mixed martial arts, there's a jujitsu school everywhere.
Yes.
Boxing clubs have become more popular. Like I started boxing when I was a teenager, and it was really hard to find a boxing club. Like nobody I knew boxed, but I think because of the rise of mixed martial arts, a lot of people are learning boxing. A lot like wrestling is more popular as a sport, a spectator sport now. I mean, real wrestling, not WWE. So yeah, any of those things. I mean, I would say start taking boxing lessons or kickboxing lessons, go to a jiu-jitsu class and stick with it.
Yeah, I live in Philadelphia and there is a jiu-jitsu school about a block away from me. And I dabbled in a couple classes and it wasn't for me personally. Maybe it's like you said, maybe I don't have the desire to get that out of me because I'm female. I don't know what it is, but I did notice like the men in there really seemed to enjoy what they were doing. There was like a camaraderie, which I found really fascinating too, because again, they're fighting each other, but there was like this camaraderie. Like you can tell they had so much love for each other, and you can tell that they were almost helping each other in a way while competing with each other all at the same time. So I thought that was really interesting.
I think there's nothing more intimate for two straight guys to do than fight. Because like really, because like you learn, like you really feel each other, you can feel each other's weaknesses and vulnerabilities. And if you're
Yeah,
training with the same people regularly, you don't want to hurt them. You don't want them to
yeah,
hurt you. So
yeah,
like, yeah, you're trying to get better together.
yeah. The reason I tried the class was because when I moved to Philadelphia, my car was stolen within like 2 weeks of living here. So I was like, damn, maybe I should know how to defend myself if something like that happens. And then when I got to that class, I realized I was like, I'm way more likely to get injured here than I am like to get attacked, out in real life. And there were just certain things that I didn't care for. The smell, I didn't like smelling people. It kind of freaked me out. But I definitely see the value in doing that. Personally, I stuck with an alarm and mace, but I
It
do think,
works.
yeah,
Yeah,
I don't, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, it is. I mean, that's part of the intimacy. Like you really smell them,
I
you
didn't
know?
like it. I was,
Uh, Yeah, but it also like, I'm gonna encourage my daughter to learn something.
yeah,
I think, the self-defense is important, but also like even more than knowing how to fight, like one of the biggest things is just knowing how to not panic if someone is controlling you or on top of you or something, which I think
yeah,
is kind of half of self-defense. Like, because I think women are more likely to feel like this kind of panic feeling when someone is smothering them for
Yeah.
various reasons. And I'm getting over that, which usually takes a few months in jujitsu. I think is already like 50% of self-defense.
Yeah, I was also afraid of the injuries, like because
Hmm.
I know it's relatively common to get injured there. And I'm a piano player. That's what I do for a living. So the idea of like breaking a finger or like a wrist or anything like that, I was just like, this might not be for me. But I definitely, like you said, for the reasons, that's not to discourage men from doing this, you know?
Totally.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, one question.
Sure.
Right when we started, my neighbor started hammering. Is that audible?
No, no.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
it's very loud over here. My mic
No,
is
I
okay,
can't
cool.
hear it. I did notice you were turning the mic off, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if that's something he does for every podcast, but it might be because of
No,
the
like the
hammering.
hammering is like really loud. It's like right outside my window, and it started right when we started. But all right, I'll stop turning off the mic because
No, yeah,
this is fine.
I could not hear it, but I did notice
Okay,
that. I
good.
was like, I just thought it was like your technique, and I'm like, wow, he's very professional. Um, okay. All right, next question. Okay, I should have put this in order before, but we're going a little bit back to the topic of porn. What do you think of OnlyFans? I personally have a pretty negative attitude towards it. I think it's a, a lot of what we talked about in the beginning about men being so distracted by this. While I think OnlyFans is a natural evolution of pornography, I think because we're becoming more and more in the tech era, so it makes sense that this would also evolve into something more interactive. Um, but with that being said, I'm almost afraid to admit this out loud because I don't want to get in trouble with anybody. But I personally don't see this as much different than a virtual form of prostitution based on the fact that
Mhm.
these women can also interact, these women can develop relationships. The only difference is they're not meeting in person. So I think it's almost like normalizing prostitution in a way. What do you think about that? Do you agree with what I said? What are your thoughts on OnlyFans?
Yeah, I don't disagree. Actually, I mean, even prostitution, I'm not in theory against it.
Yeah,
I think I think it's actually better than VR porn, let's say, or different
right.
things. I mean, as you're saying though, like OnlyFans is an obvious progression from webcam models, right?
Yeah,
Like there are guys who, watching virtual porn isn't enough. I would imagine as guys who've watched a lot of porn, that regular videos aren't enough stimulation. They want to feel some interaction, or maybe they are recognizing the lack of emotional connection in their sexual habit, and it
right.
gives them something close to like an oxytocin release by interaction.
Yeah,
Um, I actually think so. As far as like the damage to men, I don't think it's that different. Like there are guys who pay for pay sites,
yeah,
even because they feel some emotional bond to a certain porn star. It's kind of the same thing. I actually think it's dangerous for women, and
right.
this is something I'm concerned about as the father of a daughter. Like it's always been the case. Well, all right, without getting too far off, this is a time where a woman flaunting her sexuality is actually economically viable, right? Like
Yeah,
before, a conservative parent could be like, "Oh yeah, don't wear that short skirt or you sexualize yourself. Guys will only want you for one thing, whatever the thing is." That was when we were
yeah,
kids, right? Said to women. But now it's maybe harder to argue that like, yeah, but dad, I can make six figures a month showing my vagina to these guys. Like, and it's like, okay, I guess it's kind of hard to argue with that, right?
yeah,
I mean, if you're looking at money as like one of the more important things, but I don't think that. Well, one, I think it's extremely damaging to a woman's actual relationships. Like if she wants to have a
yeah,
real relationship with a good guy, I think on the one hand, over sexualize. One of the reasons why I'm not anti-prostitution is that I have a lot of friends who are sex workers or have been sex workers,
right.
women, right? And I've seen their progression. And when I was younger and a lot of my female friends were getting into it, I actually thought it was like a kind of a cool, empowering thing. It's like, oh, you're learning to like take back your power in a way that many women are victimized. You're making good money. You're having adventures, whatever. But almost all the women, I don't maybe say all the women I know who really went down that path, even if they made a lot of money, it has not been good. Like they
Yeah,
become kind of jaded about men. They have a hard time like really having real relationships. And the fact is, that a really high value guy is probably not going to want to be with a woman who's been charging to show her vagina to everybody, you know?
Yeah.
So I think it kind of, I'm looking at it now and like, it kind of sucks. Like it's kind of like a sad path to go on
Yeah.
if you're a woman. So I'm actually more concerned about girls and young women than men with OnlyFans. To me, OnlyFans is just another thing that lonely guys are going to spend money on.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I've been listening to this podcast lately. It's called Soft White Underbelly. Are you familiar with this
I've
podcast?
heard of it. I haven't listened to it.
So it's a I think his name's Mark, the guy who interviews his name Mark, but he interviews so many different people, all walks of life. And what got me interested in it is that I live in Philadelphia. A there's a section of Philadelphia called Kensington, which is one of the highest fentanyl crisis
Hmm.
set parts of I think the entire world. So it's really wild to see that like pretty close to where I live. And then I saw that he, his name is Mark Late, I believe his name is, but the podcast is called Soft White Underbelly. And he had been interviewing like all kinds of people like without any there's no like political stance. It's just I'm going to interview this person. Some of these people are sex offenders, some of these people are prostitutes in Kensington, and he had been interviewing some prostitutes from Kensington, and I was super interested because it was like, wow, these are people that live like right around the corner from me, and I want to know what's actually going on in these streets. And similar to what you said, a lot of it is really sad how a lot of people got into that business. A lot of the times, maybe not in the case with your friends, but in this situation, a lot of the times it was to support a drug habit, and none of them wanted to do what they were doing. It was just they needed the money to support this drug habit, and they all talked about how like in the beginning, the rush of the money was really nice for them. Like there was sort of an
Hmm.
addiction to having all this money, but over time they just became more and more jaded, like you said,
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
don't
And
know.
I read an article by a former escort who she was saying something like, I sucked so many guys off for money that like to ever do this for a boyfriend, like I just couldn't, or something
It,
like, or any sexual act is like, and I've a good friend who's a sex educator who talks about this, like it's kind of unnatural for a neurotypical woman to separate her emotions from sex. And he was actually, I think it was something he wrote about like, there's nothing in his eyes, there's nothing wrong with promiscuity except for women closing off their hearts in an act that should open their hearts. Right. And then
right.
like that is damaging to women. It's not how many men they've been with in itself. And I think that's certainly true for even OnlyFans to a degree.
Yeah. I can relate to what you just said about like I guess I would be a neurotypical woman. I don't know. But I have a hard time separating emotion and sex. And I also happen to be a woman with a high sex drive. And this has been like a huge challenge for me, which is why I'm actually celibate at the moment because I'm trying to learn how to utilize that energy. But it's always been a challenge because I would find that I have a massive heart, but also a massive sex drive. And the problem I would continue to have over and over again is that I would, meet a guy and really like him, but be so led by my sex drive that I would go into that first without really taking the time to get to know this person. And fast forward, here I am 35 years old and like still haven't found a partner because of this. So it's really tough as a woman who like can has both of these and like can't
Mhm.
separate them, and learning how to manage that. It's really difficult.
I mean, yeah, again, going back to evolution or nature,
Yeah.
it's like it is normal. Like
Yeah.
it would be like if we think of pre-civilization for a woman to have sex and feel no emotional attachment would be really bad because
Yeah.
sex would lead to babies every time. So like you would have this baby and you wouldn't care about it, or like
Yeah.
you would have this guy who impregnated you and you wouldn't care about him. Like that's not like obviously modern day life is different, but like that's kind of the root of why this is normal and natural for a woman to feel this way.
Yeah.
Um, but actually, yeah, I mean, you mentioned it before, like the reason why I chose to be celibate for a while was that all of my relationships started with sex. And I even as a guy noticed that it was making me make the
Mhm.
not great decisions to put it, and I wanted to, and I didn't want another like, pretend relationship or practice relationship. And I actually connected with my wife because I saw that she and I had been acquaintances before, and she posted something about celibacy on Instagram. I was like, oh, let me interview about this. And then we ended up getting together
That's
afterwards.
amazing. I love
Yeah.
that. That's really
Hmm.
that's special. Um,
Hmm.
no, same exact thing what you said though. Because I would lead relationships at first with sexual energy, I would often find myself falling in love with people that I actually didn't really like, or like not that I didn't
Hmm.
like, but really
But they
weren't the
weren't
right
good
fit
for
for
you.
me. They weren't
Yeah.
good for me. We didn't have like aligned values. We didn't have so I'm actually like to not to get too personal, but to share like something I'm going through right now. I'm in a 12-step program actually for sex and love addicts. It's based off of the 12-step tradition for alcoholics, but they just kind
Hmm.
of replace it with sex and love. As a woman, I feel like I relate a little more to the love end of things, based on what I said.
Yeah.
A lot of the men in these programs, and I don't want to generalize because there's definitely extremes on both ends. But I feel a lot of the men in these programs are struggling with issues like being faithful to their wives and porn addiction, that type of stuff. And a lot of the women come in here like, hey, I fell in love with this guy that is horrible for me. And I moved all the way to China to live with him. And we broke up. And here I relate a lot more
Yeah.
to that. And
Can I just say, because
yeah.
I'm pretty familiar with SLA, I have quite a few friends,
Oh, okay.
men and women. I haven't actually
Yeah.
been to a SLA meeting myself, but
Yeah.
I always thought it was so weird that they put male sex addicts in the same meeting with female love addicts.
Just to clarify, I don't go to the male meetings anymore. So I know
Okay.
about the males in that program because I used to, but I got like harassed by and like, for the
Yeah.
exact same reason, like you
It's like
said.
let's put
Let's put alcohol.
crack
Let's
addicts.
put a 12 pack. Which, by the way, I have to say this, not to talk crap about AA, but a lot of their conventions are in like Atlantic City. Like I'm like, you're gonna bring a bunch of alcoholics on a convention to a place where they give out free alcohol. Like, what are you doing? But anyways, that's besides the point. No, I had experienced like somebody reach out to me and kind of like basically sexually harass me. In a way that they actually call it 13th stepping. Are you aware of that
Uh-huh,
term?
yeah.
It's called the
Yeah.
13th step when you like sexually harass somebody in the program and try to like manipulate them into going backwards, you know? So after I experienced that, I strictly women's meetings only, you know?
Yeah, it's crazy that they're not all because I've had both female friends and male friends go to them, but like some of the guys were saying like I can't help having like a predatory feeling around women, especially vulnerable women, and they're putting me in a room specifically with women who will fall in love with me
Yeah.
because are like it's like what how is this why did they put this together
Yeah, no,
anyway.
it was I feel very stupidly manipulated by the person who did that to me because I'm trying to remember a little bit what happened. It was virtual, so it's not like he knew I lived or anything, so it wasn't like that. It
Mhm.
was a Zoom meeting, but he reached out to me and he was like, "Hey, I'm here to talk about whatever problems." And then somehow the conversation turned to like asking me about what my sex fantasies were and like he said he can help me psychologically solve them. And I like an idiot fell for it at first, and then like halfway through the conversation I'm like, oh my god, he's probably jerking off right now. Like, like
I mean,
like I just
likely.
so stupidly. And then I reached out to other people and I'm like, oh my god, this happened to me. They're like, he did that to me too. And I'm like, oh, he's been doing it to everybody, so
Uh-huh.
yeah, that stuff like that happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're right, but going back to what I said before, um the program, while I don't agree with everything it says, like not all of there's pros and cons to the program. Overall, it has been really helpful to have like I have a sponsor, just like the way an alcoholic, someone in AA would have a sponsor, and the sponsor basically helps me like abstain from dating anybody while I figure out why I have these destructive patterns. And then when I'm ready to date again, they kind of like watch me. Like they kind of say like, okay, they call it a sober dating plan. They're like, we're gonna have a sober dating plan. We're gonna watch you, like not watch you, that sounds creepy, but like we're gonna help you find a sober dating plan, and I'm gonna help you, like you can come talk to me about what feelings come up like when you're dating and stuff like that. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to hold you hostage here, so I only have one or two more questions for you.
No,
I have two.
that's cool. I mean, I have time because we started early. So
Yeah. I have two more questions for you.
Mhm.
One is about YouTube. Okay, because we're both YouTubers. So I started notice, and I'm curious. I'm asking this because I'm curious if you had experienced this as well. Over some time, I started to notice myself becoming inclined to present myself in a way that I thought would get more views. And I kind of stopped and caught myself. Like, so for example, clickbaity type stuff, like subjects that are trending, that type of thing. And I kind of caught myself doing it, and I was like, hold on here. Like, I don't want to become a product of whatever's going to make the money. I want to make sure I stick to my authentic voice. And I kind of was able to stop myself and step back. As a YouTuber, did you ever fall into a trap like that where you felt moved by the current of the trends and then had to like take a step back and like find yourself again?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is kind of a big thing for me because I'm on my fifth YouTube channel now. I've many
Oh,
times made a YouTube channel, done a little something, and then deleted it for various
yeah,
reasons. One of them being kind of what you're saying. I was much more dramatic when I was younger, so it's like, I'm deleting it, like whatever, like everything.
yeah,
But it's been a mix because like I started my podcast just Facebook live streaming back when that was like a thing. And
yeah,
people liked it, and I would take the audio and I put it on Spotify, and I didn't think too much about it. I was also interviewing people, but very sporadically. Like
yeah,
it was really just a hobby or a very side project. But then it started getting traction, and then I was doing like these long form. I would do them live, so I was like completely improvising what I was saying. Sometimes they would
yeah,
go 2 hours, whatever, and I really enjoyed it. And I was getting good
yeah,
feedback, and that's how my podcast initially started to grow. But YouTube was always like this thing where like I just I don't know, the algorithm didn't like me, or when it did, I would get like mean
yeah.
comments, and I took them too personally and things like that. Anyway, I don't even remember what your question was, but I've had a
The
long
question
journey with
was,
this.
sorry to interrupt. The question was, in your journey of being a YouTuber, did you ever catch yourself in a moment where you were becoming the trend and not
Oh yeah.
being your authentic self?
Oh yeah. Well, so for me, it was a little bit of the opposite of like I was starting to do this kind of from this just like internally driven, feeling
Yeah,
pure place, and some people liked it. But then I was frustrated that like it wasn't growing, or and I was also doing a lot of like I didn't have thumbnails, and my titles were random, and like it was taken from a Facebook live stream, so it was like really grainy and sometimes pixelated. It's like all the things that are bad for YouTube. But I
yeah,
was anyway really frustrated, so I spent some time kind of like going the other way of like selling out on purpose, or trying to find the trending things, or doing like the
yeah,
weird thumbnail that'll just get the
mhm,
clicks. And one, that didn't work really. And two, it felt really terrible to
yeah,
like be kind of like not authentic. And I'm not saying, I mean, I have 2,000 subscribers now, so I haven't really like really cracked anything in particular, but I think I'm finding a groove now where it's a little bit, I'm sharing these edited episodes rather than my 2 hour,
yeah,
free thoughts. I do keyword optimization beforehand to like find how to phrase my ideas in a way that will get noticed more
yeah,
rather than what is in my head. So I'm doing a little bit of both, and I feel like I'm finding a synergy that feels good. And I have been
yeah.
seeing a little bit more growth lately than let's say a year ago.
Okay.
So oh yeah, this is all the same. I'm figuring it out, and I'm trying to do that. And I'm kind of coming from the other angle where I was being maybe too authentic, or like not acknowledging that algorithms and the market want a certain thing. And I'm trying to
Okay.
find that synthesis now.
Find a balance. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I'm finding that balance as well myself because like I think I did the same thing as you, like where I started just purely doing whatever I wanted. And then I started taking it more seriously and I'm like, how can I get myself? And then before you know it, I'm having like thumbnails with like way too much cleavage, like just like a lot going on.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, hold on, like let me step back here and like try, like you said, find a balance between like being a marketing person, whatever you call those people, um, or being a podcaster, like an authentic voice, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's hard. And,
Mhm.
I mean, I'm just observing from like women I follow, like it's kind of hard to argue against not showing the cleavage if you have it, right? It's like whatever to get those eyeballs and then show that you have substance afterwards.
That was like what I was doing. Like, cause some of my friends were commenting on it, like my guy friends, they're like, what do you do? They're like, we noted, happened to notice, like, why'd you put a bikini picture? Cause I was talking about like losing weight, that type of stuff. And they're like, you should just do this to every episode. You would get all your followers instantly. But then after a while, I felt like cheesy. Like, I don't know. I felt like
Hmm.
corny or like selling myself. I don't know. It just kind of felt weird after a while.
Yeah, I think it's a tough balance. And it's true. Like, well, I mean, I follow a lot of fitness people, both men and
Yeah.
women. And it's true, I do notice the women. I mean, the women I follow usually have like useful exercise tips, but they
Yeah.
all are showing their booty in yoga
Yeah.
pants, and that's what I notice first. And then I see if So it's kind of hard to argue against it,
Yeah.
honestly,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, no, I guess that was like the way I was like saying it to myself. I'm like, well, as long as I have useful content when they arrive,
Yeah.
maybe it's not a terrible thing to like do a little clickbait. But I don't know. I'm still kind of playing around with the ideas of like how much to do that or how much to stay true to what feels right, Still playing
Yeah.
around with the
Because on the same
boundaries.
time, there's also many women who, will share like some spiritual idea, which with absolutely no substance, and really they're getting all their views because of their cleavage, and that's
Yeah.
different,
That's
right?
different. I'm definitely not doing that. Like I'm
Uh-huh.
trying to put something, but like it's funny. I remember I was like looking at the like I was looking at the analytics of my channel, like how much views and everything like that. And I looked at two of them back to back from each other. One was like a very important topic. It was like drug. What topic was it? It was like during a time where people were getting arrested for like having marijuana. It was like something about that. 13
Hmm.
views. Right next to it, a video that said, what is the best sex position? 70,000 views. And I'm like, wow, like it's just, you see what sells and it's
Uh-huh.
crazy.
Yeah. I wonder what the watch times were compared. That's one of the interesting things about YouTube analytics. Like
Yeah.
some of my, they're not that skewed, but like there's some where like, it maybe was a harder topic for people to click on or get into, but then they watched a 50-minute episode because it's, and and not that I'm an expert at this at all, but like,
Yeah.
I think YouTube does rank you better for watch time than
Yeah.
clickbait. Like people X out after they see your
Yeah,
cleavage
because
is
they
probably
might
not
see
good for
best
you.
sex position. This is going to be a
Yeah.
porn scene, and they click on it. It's just me talking. They're like, oh, fuck, like what the hell?
Yeah.
Um, okay, I have one more question for you before we end the
Hmm.
podcast. My last question for you is: in what ways has becoming a father changed your life?
Oh, many. Well, we'll get the cliche ones out of the way. Like it has made
Mhm.
me more present and more appreciative of like kind of nothing moments,
Yeah,
like uh, I think being the father to a girl has made me view women a little bit differently. Not that, yeah, I mean, anyway, as conscious as I like to think I am, like to really think of like, oh, she's a future grown woman, and every grown woman I know was a 2-year-old at one point. Like it kind of changes the way you look at things. One thing I wasn't expecting as much was, especially she's not even really talking. Like she says words, but not sentences. But noticing how much she absorbs my behavior or my
Mhm.
emotions. Like if I get like frustrated over something stupid, I can see how it affects her. So it's like, oh, it's kind of an external reminder to be the way I want to be, which is not getting frustrated over super
Yeah,
things, which is being present, which is being grounded, all of those things. And here's this external reflection to like show me, if I'm on my phone too much, she notices and she's affected or something like that. Like all of these things that I want to do for myself and being a good person or a good man. Um, it's probably more things, but that's what's coming to mind right now.
yeah. No, what you just said, I actually think the same way about relationships in general. I believe that relationships are just like mirrors of yourself. So if you
Hmm.
look at your partner and they're miserable, rather than thinking like this, what is this miserable, person? Um, what is it within you? Like not you, like I think this about myself. I'm like, what is it within me that is reflecting misery back to me? Like
Yeah.
sometimes I think that.
Yeah. And I think also it's like if the person really is a miserable person, why were you attracted to a miserable person?
Exactly.
Right.
So yeah, even if you're not necessarily the source, but exactly the same thing. There's always some blame for yourself, even if you
Yeah.
truly are dating some type of like psychopath narcissist. Why did you go there? So you're
Yeah.
100% correct. There's always some self-blame there, no matter how extreme it is
Yeah.
you
And
know
because I actually want to go into this because, like, I mean,
yeah,
it's not
sure.
even about blaming the person, but like,
Yeah.
there's so many channels now talking about NPD, which
What's
is
NPD?
a narcissistic personality disorder.
Oh yeah, it's
And,
it's over it's overdone.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so many people want to complain their ex is a narcissist, this and
Yeah.
that. And like, I coach guys in relationships a
Yeah.
lot. And like, you hear this from men too. You hear it more from women, I think, in the culture, but like men will complain
Yeah.
about that, especially anxious attached men will often complain about their ex or their partner or their soon to be ex-wife or something being a narcissist. But it's like, maybe that's true. Maybe she fits all the checklists, but like, why did you put up with it for five
Yeah.
years? Right.
Yeah.
Like, because a healthy, secure person wouldn't. And, with the basics of, say, attachment theory, I assume you're familiar, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I, I am an anxiously attached person. I know that. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I assume your listeners are probably familiar. It's like, you can blame a person for being so avoidant, but like there's something in you that was interested in such a person, or maybe
yeah.
like particularly interested to a guy who's like overly aloof and not giving you emotional validation. Like, why were you so into him? So there's something that you could have worked on in yourself where if you were really secure, you wouldn't even be interested in a guy who's not returning your messages, let's
I
say.
think like going back to the Carl Jung and the integration of the shadow, and things are going to come out no matter what. Like if you try to suppress things,
Hmm.
they're going to come out. As somebody who I feel is, that's why I'm in SLA, because I'm trying to heal that part of me that is anxiously attached to people. I think for me, I can speak from experience. The reason why I had been attracted to avoidant people is because my psychology is trying to solve that. Like the only
Hmm.
way for me to solve the pain of um being afraid of being abandoned is to be abandoned and understand and like feel that pain and understand like
Hmm.
what am I so afraid. So it's like my subconscious, I think, is just like trying to go into it as a way to try to get
Yeah.
out. Hasn't worked so far, but I believe that's why people are attracted to those people. But you're right.
Yeah.
Instead of coming from it from a place of blame, it's like you have to reach that point of like self-awareness where you realize what you're doing and why you're attracted to this person, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's a lot. I mean, I guess the real takeaway is like there's a lot more within your control than this jerk that
Yeah.
you're dating. Actually, do you know the show Bluey?
Mm-mm.
Oh, right. It's like one of the more popular kids shows right now, and I love it because like they have like these really deep like side plots. Like the show is like kids being silly, whatever, but like there's
Yeah.
like messages in for the parents. Anyway, one of the episodes is about trauma, and like this boy who thought his mom abandoned him
Mhm.
in like the play place, but he really just got mixed up. Like he's now 8 years old. It's 5 years later, but he can't help like wanting to recreate situations where his friends abandoned him and all of this stuff. And I think most like 3 year olds watching it they're not understanding that part. But they went
Yeah.
into this thing where the teacher goes up to him is like, you know what's here. You don't have to keep coming back to this place. I might not be
Yeah.
explaining it well because it's all shown
No,
in the
I
cartoon,
understand
but
what you're
like,
saying, and
yeah.
I can relate. Like I'm the adult version of that, like from what I just
Hmm.
said. And I often ask myself, why do I keep needing to go back here? Like what the hell is that? Like I think I'm ready to go on to something else, but like there's just something about it where it's like I don't know if it's an obsession, like a rumination. I don't know, like maybe obsessed people have issues with that, but it's like yeah, some people like to just keep returning back to the problem, you know?
Hmm. Yeah,
Weird.
and there's a lot of like theories about it, whether it's Jungian or not. Actually, have you heard of this book,
Mhm.
The Games People Play?
I've heard of
It's
it,
from
but
the
I don't.
70s. I
I've heard
would
of it.
recommend it. I think you would like it. It's a very simple read. It's by the guy who invented transactional analysis, which is
Yeah.
one of these branches of psychology. And it
Yeah.
was really influential in the 70s with people like Jim Rohn, who was Tony Robbins' mentor, and a lot of that advice comes from this kind of framework. But anyway,
Yeah.
his basic idea is that we play these psychological games on ourselves where we repeat patterns because it gives us a sense of familiarity. Like he was
Yeah.
even arguing against AA that
Mhm.
um, uh, someone with an alcohol problem or a substance problem, what they're addicted to is not the substance or there's many justifications like they're trying to relieve their pain or
Yeah.
whatever, but what they're really addicted to is feeling shitty about harming their family after they drink. I think that's the thing they want to return to. Like they're looking for a
Oh.
way to get punished again because for some reason is giving them comfort to have their loved ones be
Oh.
like, why did you drink again? Like, why did you lie to us again? Like that's actually the payoff. And I don't know. I have read that one book, so I don't know enough. But like his idea was like if your son is an alcoholic, let's say, punishing him is actually reinforcing the problem. You need to, I forget exactly, but you need to give him a different payoff. Like you need to say like, okay, you can drink, you go on a bender, you can lie to us, but like we're not going to give you that emotional reward in quotes of yelling at you anymore. And that
Yeah.
kind of interrupts the pattern.
Huh. Interesting. I like, and I'm like thinking about that. How I could apply that to myself as well, because it's like I can relate to that too. If I really analyze it that way, it's like if I'm dating people that are not available, I might be addicted to I guess the heartbreak in a sense, because that's more for, because in a way, like being in a healthy relationship, it would force me to like have trust, and like it would be the unknown in a way. It would be like
Yeah.
I've never had a a very healthy relationship, so I don't know what that's like. It's almost easier to return to heartbreak because I already know what to expect there, you know?
Yeah, and like we all are drawn to drama, right? Like I
Yeah.
forget, I think it's John Gottman said,
Yeah.
the relationship guy, that good relationships have lower lows. It's like you would never see a rom-com about a really healthy relationship because there's no drama, right?
Yeah.
They're not hurting each other. There's no like, and all is lost moment. But you get a lot of that in dramatic relationships that aren't actually that fulfilling, but they stimulate the same part of us that wants to watch Netflix in a way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think that that's probably accurate, the addiction to heartbreak or something.
Yeah. Man, I got a lot of work to do. All right. So that's it for today. I don't have any other questions for you. Is there anything else you want to add about like
Porn.
porn or fatherhood? It's strange to put those two things back to back or not.
Uh,
All connected, I guess.
Well, I guess some of the things, I mean, I have a 2-year-old daughter, so like that has given that I've spent so much time thinking about men and men's work and men's life and
Yeah.
whatever. Like, yeah, it's given me maybe a more holistic view on all those things. Like, in my opinion on
Mm.
OnlyFans is largely, or the reason why I care about it or think about it is because I have a
You have
daughter.
a daughter, right? And in a way, like now you have to care about. You've spent a lot of time in your career like focusing on men's health, and it's like now because you have a daughter, it's almost giving you like an avenue to now start cracking the books about women's psychology because you have a
Yeah.
woman to raise.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
I do think, and maybe this is a whole other topic, but like, like her imprint of her future relationships with men is mostly being affected by me, right? Like if
Wow.
I do something weird or whatever, or if I'm just like emotionally unavailable or something that's not, she might be drawn to that. She might end up going for avoidance because I didn't give her the attention, let's say, or whatever. And
Yeah.
there's many examples. Like I try to be aware of that with even like little things. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, so that's it for today. For the listeners, if you enjoyed what you heard today and you want to find more of him, would you like to share where they could find you?
yeah, if you search Rwando on YouTube or Spotify or Instagram, that's where you can
Yeah,
find me.
I highly
Yeah.
recommend to the listeners. I'll drop a link to his Instagram below, or maybe
Hmm.
his Instagram and his YouTube if anybody wants to click on that and subscribe.
Hmm.
I highly recommend it. I love listening to his podcast, and I like his Instagram too because he puts clips on there as well of from his podcast. So if you want something shorter as well. And that's it. Pranzata Podcast, episode 114. Just a reminder, if you like what you heard today, please hit subscribe. I'm very close to my first 1,000 subs. I think I'm like 920 or something like that. So
Sweet.
it'll be really helpful if you can help me get there. I know like 1,000 is where the monetization starts. Not that I'm in it for the money, people. I love doing this, and I would still do it if I wasn't making money. But it certainly would help me. Maybe hire a team member to help me if I get this podcast monetized. And that's it. Hope you have a good day, guys. Bye.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. That's great.
You're welcome.